Whoa, I'm a Zelda fan. In fact, the only series I have more nostalgia with than Smash is probably The Legend of Zelda. I've owned every game since Ocarina, I know the timeline inside and out, and I've even gone back and beaten the original NES version twice. So trust me, I'm coming from a loving and knowledgeable place when I talk about this shining series of games. Okay, we good? Now that that's out of the way, let's move into one of the hidden and most surprising hypocrisies within the entire franchise. And no, I'm not talking about that messy timeline. The truth is, guys, ever since Ocarina of Time, the fanbase has been divided. But through this division, one absolute pattern has emerged amongst the Zelda community, and the overall endgame is Zelda fans kinda suck. Let me explain! Wow, that was close. Good thing I planted that magic bean sprout 7 years ago. Totally worth all of those rupees. Welcome, Randys, to the best game theory ripoff on YouTube. But more importantly, welcome to a brand new year. This year, there's a ton of great Nintendo content coming out, but nothing has my attention quite like The Legend of Zelda. Whether you're a Link to the Past person or an Ocarina of Time fanboy, this is a place where you can let your freaky Zelda side out in full force with zero repercussions. Just as long as it doesn't involve the Philips games.
Well, excuse me, princess.
That's my one. Every YouTuber gets it, and that's my one. Anyways, today we're talking about something quite controversial in the series. Its ravenous fanbase. Since I can remember, The Legend of Zelda's fans have been some of the most passionate and creative groups of gamers in the industry, and for good reason. The series is a powerful adventure that makes everyone who plays it feel like they're on a personalized quest to save the Kingdom of Hyrule. The gripping story, detailed visuals, and oh god, that music. To put it briefly, every game in the series is an epic battle between good and evil, and it's clearly left its mark time and time again on gaming as a whole. But what if I told you that that same fanbase who champions this phenomenal series are also some of the most confusing and spoiled fans in any medium, ever? I know, that sounds both harsh and maybe even a little bit like an understatement. I mean, of course, the fans are demanding. This is Zelda we're talking about, royalty of modern games, and perpetual best of year nominee. Greatness is to be expected, and anything less is a huge disappointment, considering it takes roughly 5 years for a new core game to make it onto store shelves. I'm not denying the quality of the series here. Of course, the series has a few fumbles here and there. I mean, did we really need dowsing in Skyward Sword? I don't think so. But overall, this is a series that personifies quality. However, to really get into the root of the Zelda fanbase's problems, we first have to start in 1997, with my first game in the series, Ocarina of Time. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this game for very long, because let's face it, it's the definitive Zelda game whether we like it or not, at least within a 3D context. This game changed not only the course of future Zelda games, but it influenced countless others as it quickly rose as the best reviewed game of all time. So, we get it, it's a great game. It's essentially a 3D copy of A Link to the Past, but there's no denying it added enough new concepts and story elements to really give us another crown jewel in the N64's library. And as far as 3D conversions go, Link's jump to the extra dimension went a lot smoother than many of his 16-bit peers. So all of that was good, the fans were thrilled, minus a select few old schoolers, but everything was fine in Hyrule. But then something happened. We got a brand new Zelda game only 2 years after Ocarina of Time. Sure, it used the same engine and character models, but it was improved, and in the end, it was a brand new Zelda experience. Except people didn't really care. After the behemoth that Ocarina of Time proved to be, fans just didn't accept its sequel in the same way. Many people chalk this up to the radical new tone and that pesky 3-day cycle, but there was no denying that back in 2000 at least, Majora's Mask simply wasn't what Zelda fans wanted. Now, at this point in the video, I assume some of you have figured out where I'm going with this, but for those who haven't, let's fast forward to the next chapter in the Zelda Chronicle, The Wind Waker. After tepid sales of Majora's, Nintendo decided they needed to give the fans exactly what they wanted, with a realistic shiny Zelda game for their brand new console. So, they showed off a trailer at Space World, and the fanboys and girls reacted kinda like this. But then in 2003, when the game finally saw an actual release, the fans looked a little more like this. Somewhere in its development process, Nintendo scrapped that idea and engine and instead decided to use a new cel-shaded engine. Was this move due to Majora's Mask being perceived as too dark for children, or simply a creative decision by Aonuma and his team? We may never know the exact reason for the bait and switch, but in the end, that realistic battle between Link and Ganondorf would eventually evolve into what we now know as the Wind Waker. Oh, what's that? You're glad they opted for a brighter, cartoony style? Well, that's easy to say now, but back in 2003, fans of the Wind Waker were few and far between, my friend. I personally remember skipping it entirely during that generation because I felt it wasn't close enough to Ocarina for my stupid 10-year-old liking. Little did I know that no game since has been as much of a continuation of my personal favorite Zelda story, and sadly, I wouldn't even discover this fact until almost 8 years later. After its release, Wind Waker found a hard time recapturing that Ocarina of Time magic, and the internet in particular felt that the cause must have been the childlike art direction and the barren sea to explore. These features, coupled with that stupid Tingle fetch quest, made sure that a lot of potential Zelda fans never even picked up the game in the first place, which is really disheartening in a way. So at this point along our timeline of the core 3D Zelda titles, we have Ocarina of Time, the prodigy, Majora's Mask, the dark cousin, and Wind Waker, that little brother that nobody wanted. And after all of the complaints regarding Wind Waker's childlike palette, Nintendo finally decided to cave in and give the fans exactly what they wanted. If the fans loved that Space World demo back in 2000, wait until they got something even more realistic. Something the complete opposite of Wind Waker. And you know what? The entire community lost their collective minds. These days, if you search the top moments ever from E3, this trailer and its following reaction are sure to always be near the top. This was a huge moment for Nintendo as they prepared for their next console, and so, eventually they decided to simply port the game onto that new console, which meant some delays were in order. However, delaying this game ended up being a very smart move on the Big N's part, as the Wii proved to be massively successful right from its launch, and when Nintendo fans picked one up, there was only one game that absolutely trumped all of the rest: Twilight Princess. In terms of sale figures, Twilight Princess could definitely be called a hit. Sure, it was aided by being on 2 Nintendo consoles as well as the Wii's larger install base, but it was an epic Zelda adventure that many fans felt even rivaled Ocarina of Time's brilliance. But soon that parallel became its undoing. Within a few months, the backlash started, with many fans disliking the wolf form, Ganondorf's twist reveal, and the similarities between Ocarina of Time and this game's pacing. In fact, this game even featured many of the same temples from Ocarina of Time, and so it didn't take long until many fans stopped embracing the darkest game in the franchise, and they kinda just discarded it amongst their pile of Wii titles and looked forwards to the bright future in their favorite series. But around this time, something strange began to happen. I can't quite pin the exact time it occurred, but somewhere between Twilight Princess's release and the core Zelda game in 2011, the community went back.
We have to go back!
That's right, they went back into the franchise, and oddly enough, it wasn't even that far. All of a sudden, Toon Link was appearing in Smash Bros, Let's Plays of Wind Waker were being played on YouTube, and the fanboys pulled a complete 180 as it seemed the little brother who nobody wanted had somehow grown up and become the new critical darling in the franchise, even as Ocarina of Time was set to get a remake on the 3DS. The backlash was gone, and Zelda fans began to embrace the lighter side of Hyrule Spectrum, which was perfect as Nintendo had just announced a new game for the Wii that would use a more evolved engine in the style of Wind Waker. Now, Nintendo advertised the new game's look as a mix between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, but after playing the game, it was immediately clear that, aesthetically at least, this game was far more in line with Wind Waker's visuals than the dullness of its gray sequel. However, despite the impeccable timing of Nintendo, and all of the hype surrounding the 25th anniversary of the series, Skyward Sword would go on to fall into Twilight Princess's trap soon after its launch, and it was around this same time that the unthinkable happened again. After Ocarina of Time's successful 3D port, and with the help of a fan HD trailer for the game, it was finally Majora's Mask that seemed primed for an update. If Wind Waker was the dark horse in the race for the Zelda community's affection, then Majora's Mask had to be that horse's very shadow. I mean, it was mesmerizing how a game once scrutinized and mocked to death by many, beyond the most hardcore of Zelda fans of course, was now overtaking Wind Waker as the franchise's darling. But overtake it did, and now it seems that saying Majora's Mask is your favorite Zelda game on the internet is as cliched as stating the same of Ocarina. So if we look back to our timeline of love, that's a thing, right? And add Twilight Princess, the shadowy uncle, and Skyward Sword, the strict mother, then this family tree is almost complete. Except over time, every game and every one started growing along with the series, and all of a sudden our once golden child has become the laughingstock and looks more like a dropout than a prodigy. So essentially the pattern goes like this. Nintendo announces 3D core Zelda game. Fanboys go crazy for the new installment. The new game is released. The fanbase picks the game up first day. But then the backlash sets in and the game is relegated to being the black sheep of the 3D franchise. Fast forward 8 to 10 years though, and that very game that was put aside slowly becomes number one in fans' hearts again. All of the things initially despised by the community become the game's very soul, and we the fans end up with a remake of some sort. Don't believe me? Well, sure, there's a few holes in this theory, like why Wind Waker was remade before Majora's, but for evidence, look no further than where we sit now. At this moment, Majora's Mask, the current golden child, heck, it even got a cool nickname from the community, is receiving its remake this spring, with a specialized 3DS bundle, a cool box set with a figurine, and love from the fanbase as a whole. It's a good time to be the king, baby. Meanwhile, Skyward Sword, the last released core game in the franchise, seems to have become the internet's punching bag. Yeah, Groose and Link's relationship with Zelda are beautiful concepts, but they're just the good parts in an otherwise flawed game, right? I mean, the motion controls were annoying. Dousing and the fetch quests were so tedious, and Zelda is no place for that much linearity and backtracking. There's no way a game like that could possibly ever overtake My Wind Waker or Majora's Mask, right? Right? Well, yeah, maybe it can't overtake your personal favorite Zelda experience, but these games appear to be cyclical, and you'd better believe that within the entire community, this game will eventually have its day in the sun. Just like how Twilight Princess is slowly rising in the series ranks as a once despised fan favorite. Just like Majora's Mask and Wind Waker before them. And the reason for this is really simple. It's not out of nostalgia or hindsight, it's because we're jerks. The Zelda fanbase are the worst because we can't appreciate what we have until it's gone. You know who the majority buyers of Majora's Mask are going to be? 14 to 25-year-olds. That sounds obvious, right? That's like the target demographic for video games, but think a little harder. Majora's came out in 2000 and is now 15 years old. That means that when the game originally came out, the ones who were the most excited to grab a copy this year were either unborn or between the ages of 1 and 15. In other words, they were kids. I myself am in this age group, and I remember when I was a kid, not wanting to even touch Majora's Mask because everyone older than me were indifferent to it. Because of the backlash they felt about a game that wasn't Ocarina, I avoided it for a very long time until finally I was old enough to make my own decisions and finally used my own money to buy a copy. When you're a kid, you just go with the flow, and if the flow says the Skyward Sword is stupid for dowsing and not as good as Wind Waker, then a 10-year-old kid without a job isn't gonna waste a birthday present on it. But maybe, once they have a job 10 years later, the game will pique their interest again, and they'll finally pick it up. And that's all I'm getting at when I call us jerks and say we're not appreciating a game until it's gone. Because guys, we've already lost Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. We had our chance with motion controls and darker palettes, and we blew it. But a few years from now, some of those kids who missed out and bought Galaxy or Smash Bros instead are gonna pick up their brother's old copy of Skyward Sword and fall in love with the series, just like we did with Wind Waker or Majora's Mask. And we're not going to have the time to go back and explore those versions of Hyrule like those kids can. Those motion controls that we all hate are going to be inventive and fun. That relationship between Link and Zelda I mentioned earlier is going to be their first foray into outstanding characterization in a medium other than TV. And Girahim's twisted sense of humor is going to scare them, so that when they finally take him down in the final battle, they're going to feel the same sense of elation we got taking down Beast Ganon in Ocarina of Time. This is why I urge all of you to give the new game set for release this fall a proper chance to shine. maybe it'll end up being too open and non-linear, maybe the villain will be even less threatening than Zant. But if we let this pattern continue, then we'll never truly experience everything this game's world has to offer. Remember, we didn't replay Ocarina of Time 3 times in a row because its post-game was incredible. We did it because as kids, it was one of the only games we had, and we wanted to know everything that world had to offer. I'm not saying this pattern is bulletproof, and I'm not saying that all Zelda fans are the problem. In fact, it's a great problem to have. We as a fanbase are so passionate about a series of games that we're willing to debate them until we're as blue in the face as King Zora. And I expect many comments telling me why I'm wrong, or why Skyward Sword will never take over the fans' hearts like Wind Waker did. But I don't really care. I hope this little video has given you some insight into the community's behavior, but in the end, like every Zelda fanboy, my experience with the franchise is vastly different from yours, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Well, it looks as though it'll be another great year to be a Zelda fan, and you can look forward to a ton more videos on my favorite franchise throughout 2015. In the meantime, please feel free to join the Randy Union if you like the video by clicking subscribe, and please let us know your thoughts on the theory and what your favorite Zelda game is in the comments below. And maybe even share it with your Zelda-loving friends if you think any of what I just talked about makes any sense at all. You can find us on Twitter @randomtens if you have a question, concern, or just want to show some love. We really appreciate hearing from you guys. Next month, we'll be going back to our roots and counting down my personal top 10 favorite Zelda games, so please stay tuned for that. And whatever you do, wear a fire tunic, cause that comment section is sure to be boiling. Thanks guys.